Alien girl learns why the galaxy calls humans Deathworlders after seeing one stand alone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The planet had always been a dangerous place, desolate, harsh, with winds that cut like knives and temperatures that could freeze a creature in seconds. It was here, on this planet where survival was the name of the game, that an unlikely hero would show the universe exactly why humans were known as Deathworlders. Jack Carter, a seasoned soldier from Earth, stood alone in the middle of an open plain, facing down the odds without a hint of fear. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the barren landscape, and the wind whipped around him, making his uniform flap against his body. His breathing was steady, controlled, despite the storm raging around him. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of his title, Deathworlder. Humans, with their raw grit and unparalleled adaptability, had earned that title across the galaxy, and Jack was living proof of why. An alien girl named Zia watched from a distance, hidden behind a craggy rock formation, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen a human fight like this before. She had heard stories of Earthlings, of their resilience, their stubbornness, their ability to survive in the most unforgiving environments. But seeing it firsthand, watching Jack stand alone against the elements, was something else entirely. Zia had grown up on a planet where survival meant being the strongest, the fastest, the smartest. But humans, she learned, survived not just through strength, but through sheer willpower and determination. Zia had always considered herself tough. She was a warrior from the Dominion, raised to fight and conquer. But now, standing in the shadows, she realized how much she had underestimated humans. Jack didn't need a weapon to prove his strength. He relied on his instincts, his training, and his unshakable belief that he would survive, no matter what. The storm was fierce, the temperature well below freezing, and yet, there Jack stood, unyielding, as the winds howled around him. Zia could see the pain in his eyes, but it only fueled his resolve. This was what made humans different, she thought. This was why they were called Deathworlders. As Zia watched, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known about survival. She had been taught that strength was all that mattered, but Jack was showing her something far deeper, a strength born not just from muscle, but from the heart. He didn't just fight to survive. He fought because he believed in the cause, in the belief that no matter how dire the circumstances, he could make it through. And that was what made him a Deathworlder. The storm was unforgiving, but Jack Carter stood unshaken. His breath misted in the freezing air, each exhale a cloud of vapor that hung in the gale for a split second before being swallowed by the howling winds. His boots sank slightly into the icy terrain, but he didn't budge. The storm had been fierce, relentless, but he wasn't going to let it defeat him. He would not yield, not here, not now. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he ignored it, focusing only on the task at hand. The howls of the wind were like a constant reminder of the odds he faced. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, Jack was perfectly still, perfectly calm. Zia, the alien girl, watched from her hidden vantage point, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had seen warriors face storms before, but none like this. The humans she had met were always portrayed as weaklings, fragile creatures with no chance of survival in the galaxy's harshest corners. But Jack, he was different. There was something about him that defied everything she had been taught. Her own people, the Tan Dominion, were known for their strength and resilience. Zia had grown up in the midst of fierce battles, training under the most rigorous conditions. But this human, this Deathworlder, had something else. He wasn't relying on brute strength or advanced technology. It was something deeper. His willpower, his refusal to give up, was palpable, almost tangible. The more she watched him, the more she realized that the legends about humans, their tenacity, their strength, their ability to survive against all odds, were not just stories. They were real. For the first time, Zia felt a seed of doubt in the beliefs she had carried with her all her life. She had always been taught that survival depended on physical strength and the ability to dominate, to conquer. But here, in the middle of this storm, Jack was showing her that survival was about more than just fighting. It was about spirit, about determination, about the will to endure even when all seemed lost. Jack's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his focus unwavering. He wasn't concerned about the storm, the cold, or the pain. His thoughts were clear: survive. He had faced worse, and he had come out stronger. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for something greater. Zia felt an overwhelming urge to approach him, to ask him how he did it, how he could stand there, unbroken, while the storm raged around him. But she stayed hidden, watching in silence. She knew she wasn't ready yet to face the truth he represented. It was a truth she wasn't sure she was prepared to accept. The storm raged on, but Jack was still standing, his back straight and his gaze unwavering. He was the embodiment of human resilience. He was a Deathworlder. And in that moment, Zia understood exactly why the galaxy feared the humans. It wasn't their weapons, their technology, or their fleets. It was their unyielding spirit, their refusal to ever give up. The storm may have been fierce, but Jack Carter stood as its equal. And for the first time, Zia felt a deep respect for the humans she had once underestimated. The wind howled through the barren plains, but Jack Carter stood firm, his arms crossed over his chest, facing the storm with a sense of quiet resolve. It had been hours since Zia had first seen him, but in that time, something had shifted within her. The alien girl had always seen the galaxy through the lens of her own experiences. Strength and power were the only true measures of survival. Yet, Jack was something different. The more she watched him, the more she realized that his strength wasn't just in his muscles or his ability to fight. It was in his unwavering determination, his refusal to succumb to the elements or to give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Zia had been raised on a planet where the strong survived and the weak perished. She had always believed that only through physical strength could one prove their worth. Yet, as she watched Jack, she began to question her own beliefs. The way he stood, unmoved by the fierce winds and freezing temperatures, was unlike anything she had ever seen. There was something about him that made her rethink everything she had known about survival. She stepped closer, her footsteps muffled in the thick snow as she approached Jack from behind, keeping her distance just enough to avoid being seen. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. What kind of creature was this human? Who could face such a storm without flinching? What did it take to be like him? Zia was no stranger to battle, to pain, or to loss. She had seen her share of fierce warriors fall, their bodies broken by the harsh realities of their worlds. But Jack's endurance, his quiet strength, was something else entirely. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about standing tall even when everything around you was crumbling. She felt a sense of admiration stirring within her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She had always been told that humans were weak, frail, incapable of surviving in the galaxy's most dangerous corners. But here, watching Jack endure the storm, she was beginning to see why the galaxy feared humanity. Zia didn't know how long she stood there, watching him, feeling something shift deep inside her. There was a pull, an invisible thread that seemed to tie her to this strange human. She had always been taught to see humans as inferior, to see their fragility as a weakness. Yet here she was, watching one of them stand alone in the midst of a deadly storm, unbroken and unafraid. For the first time in her life, Zia felt a strange respect for a human, something she had never thought possible. She had always seen herself as a warrior, a being strong enough to survive any challenge. But Jack was something else. He wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. He was a Deathworlder, and he was showing her that strength wasn't just about power. It was about heart. As the storm began to subside, Jack finally lowered his arms, turning slightly as if sensing someone nearby. Zia quickly stepped back, hiding behind a rocky outcrop, her breath quickening in her chest. She wasn't ready to confront him yet, not with all the questions swirling in her mind. She had to process what she had just witnessed. Jack Carter, a human soldier, had shown her the true meaning of resilience. And in that moment, Zia knew that everything she had believed about her place in the universe was about to change. As the storm finally began to subside, Jack Carter slowly turned around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The winds were still fierce, but the worst of it had passed. His body ached, every muscle protesting from the hours of fighting against the elements. But his focus remained sharp. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let a little thing like a storm stand in his way. His thoughts were interrupted as he noticed a figure standing at the edge of his peripheral vision. Zia. She was watching him from behind a rock, her presence barely detectable, but Jack had learned long ago to trust his instincts. He could feel her eyes on him. Her presence was unmistakable, and for a brief moment, he considered walking over to her. But something told him she wasn't ready yet. Jack's gaze softened as he looked at the alien girl. She had been following him for hours, unseen, observing his every move. He had known she was there the whole time. Humans were used to being watched, especially in hostile environments. It was part of the job, but there was something different about Zia. Her curiosity, her fascination with him. It was unlike anything he had encountered before. He could see it in the way she looked at him, in the way her eyes studied his every movement. She wasn't just watching for threats or seeking to understand his weaknesses. No, she was watching because something within her had shifted. Jack didn't know what it was, but he had a feeling that their encounter, however strange, had changed both of their paths. He could feel the weight of her gaze, but he didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, Jack began to make his way toward a small outpost he had spotted earlier, a makeshift shelter where he could tend to his equipment and get a few moments of rest. Zia, still hidden, continued to watch him, her mind racing with questions. She had been raised to believe that the strongest survived, that power, dominance, and superiority were the keys to victory. But Jack, he had shown her something she had never expected. It wasn't about strength or power. It was about heart, about willpower, about never giving up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Zia had never seen anything like it. Her people, the Tan Dominion, were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and combat prowess. But even they could not withstand the brutality of a storm like the one Jack had just endured. She had seen warriors fall to lesser challenges. And yet, here was a human, standing strong in the face of nature's wrath. Zia's thoughts were interrupted when Jack finally turned to walk away, his pace steady and sure. She felt a strange pull, an undeniable urge to follow him, to understand more. Without thinking, she stepped out from her hiding spot, her footsteps crunching softly in the snow. Jack didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. He could feel her presence, even though he didn't acknowledge it. They walked in silence, the cold air biting at their faces as the distant hum of the shelter's power systems grew louder. Zia's heart raced as she took a few tentative steps closer. She was still unsure of what to make of this human, but she could not deny the curiosity that burned within her. She had to know more. She had to understand. Jack continued forward, his pace unbroken. He knew Zia was following him, and yet, he didn't stop. He wasn't afraid. There was no need for fear. Not anymore. His experiences on Earth had taught him how to face any challenge, how to stand tall in the face of the most impossible odds. But there was something different about Zia. Something that made him want to protect her. Something that made him want to show her that there was more to life than strength and power. That sometimes, the greatest strength came from within. The shelter loomed ahead, a small, makeshift structure built into the side of a rocky outcrop. Jack approached it with steady steps, the cold air nipping at his skin. Zia followed a few paces behind, still processing everything she had witnessed. She had seen Jack endure the storm, stand tall against nature's wrath, and now, she was beginning to understand that humans were not the weak, fragile creatures she had been taught to believe they were. As they reached the shelter, Jack stepped inside, the door creaking open as he entered. Zia hesitated at the threshold, unsure of what to do next. She had never interacted with a human like this before, never been this close to one. She had always seen them as inferior, as beings who were unfit for the harsh realities of the universe. But now, after everything she had witnessed, those beliefs were starting to crumble. Jack glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Come on in," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's not much, but it'll keep us out of the cold for a while." Zia nodded, stepping inside, and the door shut with a soft thud behind her. The interior was simple, metal walls, a small cot in the corner, a few crates stacked in another. It was clear that Jack didn't need much to survive, that he was used to roughing it. The warmth of the shelter was a welcome relief from the biting cold outside, and Zia took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body begin to ease. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the various tools and equipment scattered about. "You're used to this," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and curiosity. Jack shrugged, setting his bag down on the table. "You get used to it after a while. Doesn't matter where you are. If you want to survive, you adapt." Zia's eyes narrowed slightly as she watched him. She had never met anyone like him before. There was something about Jack that set him apart from the warriors and leaders she had known. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a symbol of something greater. A quiet strength, a determination that seemed to flow from him naturally. "You don't seem afraid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of what?" Jack asked, looking up from his gear. "Of dying," she said simply. Jack's expression softened for a moment, and he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I've been to places where death was a constant companion," he said. "But you can't be afraid of it. If you are, it'll control you. You have to live, not just survive." Zia took a step forward, her gaze fixed on him. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. The warriors of her people fought with honor, with strength, but they had never spoken of survival the way Jack did. It wasn't about fighting for victory. It was about fighting for the right to live. "But how do you do it?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "How do you keep going, even when everything seems impossible?" Jack paused for a moment, then gave her a small, thoughtful smile. "You just do. It's not about the odds. It's about what you're willing to fight for. And I'm willing to fight for the chance to keep moving forward." Zia stood there, processing his words. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was seeing a human, not as a weak, inferior being, but as something stronger, more resilient than she could have ever imagined. She realized, with a start, that she was no longer seeing Jack as a human from Earth. She was seeing him as something more, something that transcended the species divide, something that she could learn from. "I don't understand," Zia said softly, her voice barely audible. "How can you be so sure of yourself?" Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady and calm. "Because I've seen what happens when you don't believe in yourself," he said quietly. "And I'm not going to make that mistake." Zia nodded slowly, her thoughts swirling. She had always believed in strength, in power, but Jack was showing her that there was another way. A way that didn't rely on brute force. A way that came from within. And for the first time, Zia realized that perhaps, just perhaps, humans weren't as weak as she had been taught to believe. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the shelter, casting a warm glow that flickered across the metal walls. Jack and Zia sat opposite each other, a comfortable silence filling the space between them. Zia had been deep in thought since their conversation, trying to process everything Jack had shared. She had always believed that to survive, one had to rely on strength, on the ability to fight and conquer. But Jack had shown her something entirely different. He had shown her that survival wasn't just about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about resilience, about finding the will to keep going even when the world seemed determined to break you. The idea was difficult for Zia to wrap her mind around. For so long, she had been taught that the galaxy respected only those who could dominate, those who could prove their worth through physical might. But now, after witnessing Jack in action, after seeing the quiet strength in his eyes and hearing the conviction in his voice, Zia was beginning to understand that survival was about more than just power. Jack had shown her that it was about heart, about determination, about the unyielding will to fight for something greater than yourself. As the fire crackled and the warmth filled the room, Zia felt a strange sense of peace settle in her chest. She had spent so many years fighting, training, surviving. But now, she felt like she was learning something new, something more important. She looked at Jack, who was now cleaning his gear, his movements methodical and calm. He didn't need to say anything more. His actions spoke volumes, showing her what it truly meant to be a Deathworlder. Jack glanced up, catching Zia's gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. Zia was beginning to understand. She was beginning to see the world through a different lens, one that didn't just focus on strength, but on something deeper. "You know," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "I've never met anyone like you before." Jack paused, his hands stilling for a moment as he looked at her. "And what do you think of me now?" he asked, his voice steady. But there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. Zia hesitated, thinking carefully before speaking. I think I've been wrong about humans. Jack raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yeah? What changed your mind? Zia looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly. I've always been taught that humans are weak, that you're not fit for survival in the galaxy's toughest environments. But after watching you, I see now that survival isn't about brute force. It's about something more, something deeper. Jack nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. You're starting to get it, he said quietly. Zia met his gaze again, her eyes filled with a newfound respect. I've been raised to think that strength is the only thing that matters. But now I see that strength comes in many forms. And it's not just about surviving, it's about living. It's about the heart, the will to keep going. Jack smiled then, a small but genuine smile. Exactly, he said. Surviving is one thing. Living, really living, is something else entirely. The conversation hung in the air between them, a quiet understanding passing between the two of them. Zia wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was beginning to understand the universe in a way she never had before. And it was all thanks to a human, a Deathworlder, who had shown her that there was more to strength than just muscle. There was heart. And maybe, just maybe, that was all that really mattered. As the days passed, the shelter became a place of quiet reflection. Jack and Zia had grown accustomed to each other's presence, yet there was a certain unspoken distance between them. Zia had learned much in these few days, not just about Jack's strength, but about his character. He wasn't just a warrior. He was someone who carried a deep sense of responsibility and empathy. In many ways, he was nothing like the cold, calculating soldiers of her own people. Jack had spent his life learning how to survive, but he had also learned how to help others, to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Zia found herself intrigued by him in ways she hadn't expected. As much as she tried to keep her distance, there was something about him that drew her in. Maybe it was his quiet confidence, or the way he carried himself in the face of danger. Or maybe it was something deeper, the way he made her question everything she had ever believed. Zia knew that she had always relied on her strength and her training. She had been taught that only the strong survived. But now, after spending time with Jack, she was starting to understand that survival wasn't just about physical strength. It was about the will to keep going, no matter what. It was about making the choice to fight for something more than just survival. One evening, as the two of them sat by the fire, Zia found herself speaking more openly than she had before. Jack, she began, her voice softer than usual. I've been thinking about everything you've shown me. Jack glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. What about it? He asked, his tone calm but curious. Zia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. You've taught me something. Something I didn't understand before. You've shown me that strength isn't just about fighting or winning. It's about something deeper. It's about what you're willing to stand for. Jack nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're starting to see it, huh? Zia nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. Yeah, I never thought about it that way. I've always been taught that survival is about being the strongest, the fastest. But you've shown me that survival is about more than that. It's about heart. It's about the will to keep going, even when it seems impossible. Jack leaned back, resting his hands behind his head. It's not easy to learn, but you're getting it. Zia fell silent, her gaze flickering to the fire. She didn't know what had changed in her, but she could feel the shift inside her. The old beliefs she had held so tightly were beginning to loosen, replaced by a new understanding of what it meant to truly survive. It wasn't about crushing your enemies or proving your strength. It was about enduring, about finding the strength to keep going even when the world around you was falling apart. I never understood humans, Zia continued, her voice thoughtful. But now, I think I'm starting to. Jack gave a small laugh. You're not the only one. We're a strange bunch. Zia looked at him, her expression serious. You're not what I expected. I thought humans were weak, that you couldn't survive on your own in this universe. But now, I see that I was wrong. Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady and calm. We're not as weak as some people think, but we're also not perfect. We're flawed, just like everyone else. The difference is, we keep going. We fight. And that's what makes us strong. Zia sat in silence for a moment. her mind racing with the realization that everything she had believed in was being challenged. The world she had known, the world where strength was the only thing that mattered, was starting to crumble. And in its place, something new was emerging. Something that was much harder to define, but felt more true. I think I want to keep going, too, Zia said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Jack smiled, his eyes gleaming with a quiet pride. You will. You've got the strength, Zia. You just need to believe in it. Zia looked down at her hands, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was starting to live. And it was because of Jack, the human who had shown her that there was more to strength than just fighting. There was heart, and that made all the difference. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of purpose. Jack and Zia had found a rhythm, a routine that helped them adapt to the challenges of their environment. While Jack worked on maintaining their shelter and equipment, Zia focused on improving her skills, learning more about human survival tactics, and adapting them to her own ways. They didn't speak much about their pasts. Both knew that the present was all that mattered. But every once in a while, Zia would catch herself staring at Jack, studying him with a curiosity she couldn't explain. He had shown her a different way of thinking, a new way of seeing the world. It was a world where survival wasn't just about physical strength, but about finding the will to endure, to keep going despite the odds. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Zia spoke up. Jack, do you ever think about home? She asked, her voice tentative. Jack didn't look up from the fire, but his expression softened. I think about it sometimes, he replied, but I don't let it control me. The past is behind us. We can't change it. All we have is the present, and what we make of it. Zia nodded slowly, her gaze flickering to the flames. She understood what he meant. She had been running from her past for so long, trying to outrun the expectations of her people, the pressure to conform to their ideals of strength and power. But now, with Jack, she was learning that there was more to life than that. There was room for something different, something softer, something more human. Zia glanced over at him, the firelight casting flickering shadows on his face. Do you ever feel like you don't belong? She asked quietly. Jack raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sometimes, he said, but that's part of the journey. We're all just trying to find our place in this big, crazy universe. Zia looked down at her hands, feeling a sense of weight settle in her chest. She had always felt like an outsider, like she was never quite fitting in, no matter where she was or who she was with. But here, with Jack, in this small shelter on a desolate planet, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. I never thought I would feel like this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at her, his eyes steady and understanding. It's a good feeling, isn't it? He said. Zia nodded slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. It was a feeling she hadn't realized she had been craving. Acceptance, not just for her strength, but for who she truly was. And in that moment, she knew that she had found something more important than survival. She had found a connection. As the night stretched on, the fire crackled softly in the background. Zia sat in silence, reflecting on everything that had brought her to this point. The battle, the pain, the loss. Everything had led her here, to this strange, unexpected place where she was beginning to understand what it meant to be truly alive. The journey was far from over, and there was still much she had to learn, but for the first time, Zia felt hopeful. She had found something in Jack that she hadn't even known she was looking for, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still light. And with that thought, she let herself rest, knowing that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, Jack and Zia's bond grew stronger. They had found a rhythm, an unspoken understanding that made their lives together easier. The harsh environment of the planet no longer seemed as threatening, not with the knowledge that they had each other's backs. Jack had taught Zia many things about surviving in the wild, about making do with what they had. Zia, in turn, had begun to share more of her past with him, her upbringing, her training, and the expectations placed upon her by her people. They spent hours discussing everything from survival tactics to the philosophies of life. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. One morning, after a night of fierce winds and bone-chilling cold, Jack was up early, checking the shelter's structural integrity. Zia joined him, her footsteps light in the snow as she approached. She had learned to appreciate these quiet moments, the time spent just taking care of the basics, as mundane as it might seem. There was something comforting about it. "I think we're going to need more supplies soon," Jack said, tapping the side of the shelter. "We're good for now, but if we're going to stay here longer, we'll need to plan ahead." Zia nodded, pulling her hood tighter around her face to block out the cold. "I can help gather materials. We need to be prepared, just in case the storm season hits again." Jack smiled, glancing over at her. "I've got no doubt you'll be an asset. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for." Zia felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She hadn't realized how much she had come to rely on Jack's support until now. "You've taught me a lot," she said softly. "More than I ever thought I'd learn from a human." Jack chuckled, his tone light. "Well, I'm just full of surprises." The day passed quickly as they worked together, collecting supplies and reinforcing their shelter. Zia found herself becoming more comfortable with the tasks at hand, her confidence growing as she continued to learn from Jack. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, Zia and Jack sat down by the fire, the crackling warmth a welcome relief from the bitter cold. Zia stared into the flames, her thoughts drifting. She was no longer the alien warrior who had been taught to dominate and conquer. She was something else now, something more human, perhaps. She had found strength in a different form, one that didn't rely on power or force. It was the strength of resilience, of enduring even when everything seemed to be against you. Jack had shown her that. "I never thought I'd feel at peace in a place like this," Zia said, breaking the silence. Jack raised an eyebrow, looking at her with a soft smile. "Yeah, I get that. But sometimes, peace is found in the most unexpected places." Zia nodded, her gaze softening. "I think I've been running from my past for too long," she said, her voice quieter now. "But here, with you, I'm starting to find a way to move forward. To live, not just survive." Jack's expression softened, and he leaned back against the shelter. "You're learning, Zia. You've got more strength in you than you realize." Zia smiled, the weight she had been carrying for so long lifting just a little. She knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. She wasn't alone anymore. And with Jack by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could finally let go of the past and embrace the future. As the fire crackled and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Zia knew that her journey was far from over. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face it. She had found her place, here, with Jack, on a distant planet where survival was no longer just about strength. It was about living, about fighting for something greater than oneself. And that, she realized, was worth fighting for.